Everyone is watching the carriers, the strike jets, the nuclear submarines, the expensive, headline-grabbing hardware that fills the defense press, and the budget debates. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, though, a very different competition has been running quietly for years. And as of August 2025, Britain just won it in a way that almost nobody outside naval circles fully noticed. Norway signed a deal for 5 British frigates, £10 billion, the largest single defense acquisition in Norwegian history, sealed without fanfare, and Norway was not even the first nation to make that call. Australia had already committed, Canada had already committed, 3 allied nations across 3 separate continents running 3 separate procurement competitions, all arriving at the same answer, the same ship, built on the Clyde. That simply does not happen. In the world of major warship procurement, where national pride, domestic industry politics, and alliance obligations pull in 17 directions simultaneously, 4 countries independently selecting an identical platform is essentially unheard of. The last time something close to it occurred was before the Second World War, and that comparison is not made lightly. So, what does this ship actually do? Why does it matter so much? And why, if it is this capable, has nobody been talking about it properly? That is what we are here for. Begin with the problem the Type 26 was built to solve, because the problem is worth understanding on its own terms. The North Atlantic is not quiet. It hasn't been quiet for several years. Russian submarine activity in the waters between Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and the United Kingdom reached levels not seen since the Cold War by the early 2020s, and it has not meaningfully decreased since. These are not diplomatic incursions or symbolic patrols. They are persistent, professional operations by modern submarines capable of threatening the undersea cables carrying most of the world's internet traffic, the supply lines that would sustain any major NATO operation, and the ballistic missile submarines underpinning the entire Western nuclear deterrent. NATO's ability to counter that depends, more than on almost anything else, on anti-submarine warfare frigates, which are ships that exist specifically to find, track, and if necessary, neutralize submarines. And here is where the numbers become uncomfortable. The Royal Navy's current anti-submarine frigates, the Type 23s, are old. The newest of them entered service in 2002, and the oldest dates to 1989. They are being retired across this decade, and the ships replacing them are not arriving quickly. HMS Glasgow, the first Type 26, launched in December 2022 and won't reach full operational capability until 2028. There is a gap, a real measurable gap in capability at exactly the moment the threat is most acute. That's not a bureaucratic scheduling problem. That's a hole in the lid of the North Atlantic. Now forget what the admirals say in their public statements for a moment and look at what the program's own history tells you about how seriously this was taken. The Type 26 did not begin life as a confident, well-funded procurement. It started in 1998 as the Future Surface Combatant, a vague designation covering a loosely defined family of ships that the Ministry of Defense had not really decided how to build, fund, or specify. 12 years passed before BAE Systems received a design contract worth £127 million in 2010, and only then did the program get renamed the Global Combat Ship, and the detailed work of actually determining what this vessel needed to do begin in earnest. 12 years of committees, revisions, and shifting requirements, which is the kind of origin story that tends to produce either something genuinely extraordinary or something enormously expensive and mediocre. Occasionally, it produces both. What came out of that process was a ship built around a single central obsession, which is acoustic stealth. The ability to move without being heard. Every transverse frame in the hull is unique, shaped individually to reduce the flow noise that would otherwise radiate into the water and announce the ship's presence to every submarine within range. Almost every pipe and every cable tray aboard is mounted on rubber dampers, preventing vibrations from engines and onboard systems from transferring through the hull and into the sea around it. The ship's Rolls-Royce MT-30 gas turbine, which is the same engine that powers a Formula One power unit for approximately 15 minutes before requiring a full rebuild, can be switched off entirely in favor of electric motors running on diesel generators. In that electric mode, the ship trades raw speed for near silence, and it does so at exactly the moment silence matters most. The Sonar 2087 towed array, developed by Thales and integrated into the British Type 26, detects submarines at ranges of up to 60 kilometers. That figure deserves a moment of consideration. 60 kilometers is the distance between central London and Brighton. The Type 26 can hear a submarine that is sitting off Brighton while operating from the Thames. That detection envelope is what the entire engineering philosophy of the program was designed to enable, and achieving it required the ship itself to stop making noise first. No two frames are the same. Nothing vibrates freely. It is, in the most literal sense, a warship built entirely around its ears. In June 2017, the first contract for 3 ships came in at £3.7 billion. The second contract, signed in November 2022, covered the final 5 for £4.2 billion, bringing the full Royal Navy order to 8 ships at roughly £1.3 billion each by current estimates. That number sounds large until you consider what it delivers. A vessel displacing over 8,000 tons when fully loaded, 149 meters long, carrying a 48-cell launcher for air defense missiles, a 24-cell strike-length launcher for future long-range weapons, and the quietest active sonar and towed array combination fitted to any Western surface combatant currently in production. If the Norway deal and what it means for the North Atlantic interest you, this channel tracks how agreements like that translate from signed contracts to operational warships. Subscribing means you'll be here when that story develops further. Here's the thing about the 34-ship figure that appears in press releases. Up to 34 warships across 4 nations, all sharing the same fundamental platform. It reads like a program that has already succeeded, but the arithmetic is more complicated, and it's worth being honest about that. Australia originally committed to 9 Hunter-class frigates, and in February 2024, quietly reduced that number to 6. The cost estimate climbed from 35 billion Australian dollars to approximately 38 billion Australian dollars for the smaller fleet. The Australian variant of the Type 26 had diverged considerably from the original British design, incorporating an American Aegis combat system and an Australian-developed radar, and those changes created serious problems: weight margin problems, integration problems, cost problems. Those are the kind of problems that turn 9 ships into 6 ships without anyone formally announcing that something has gone wrong. Canada, for its part, is building up to 15 River-class destroyers on the same hull at Irving Shipbuilding in Halifax, with construction of the first 3 beginning in June 2024, and the total program cost reaching 69.8 billion Canadian dollars by 2024. The scale of that number is worth stating plainly. Canada is spending roughly the equivalent of the entire Royal Navy's budget for most of a decade on 15 frigates based on a British design that has not entered service yet. There is a dry observation to be made here, which is that when a British defense program manages to export so successfully that allies spend more building it than the country that designed it, something has gone either very expensively wrong or very right. In this case, it appears to be both simultaneously, and nobody seems entirely sure which column is winning. Norway's decision, confirmed on the 31st of August 2025, cuts through some of that ambiguity. Oslo ran a proper competitive process. France, Germany, the United States, and the United Kingdom were all shortlisted, all evaluated, and the Type 26 came out on top. 5 ships, £10 billion. And then, in December 2025, both nations signed the Lunna House Agreement, committing the Royal Navy and the Royal Norwegian Navy to operate as a single, interchangeable force in the North Atlantic. Not as allies who coordinate occasionally. As a combined fleet sharing the same equipment, the same logistics, the same operational doctrine, and by implication, the same strategic exposure. By April 2026, Norway formally joined the Global Combat Ship User Group at a ceremony in Halifax, which meant all 4 nations were locked into a shared program structure covering common upgrades, common maintenance schedules, and common assumptions about what the threat actually looks like. 13. Identical anti-submarine warfare frigates operating between the United Kingdom and Norway alone, across exactly the waters where Russian submarine operations have been most persistent. That is not a coincidence. That is a specific answer to a specific problem, assembled deliberately across nearly a decade of procurement decisions by 4 governments that rarely agree on anything this cleanly. But here's the thing that doesn't appear in any press release. The Royal Navy's own build program may be quietly funding Norway's delivery timeline. Reports from Navy Lookout as recently as April 2026 raised the possibility that one of the Royal Navy's own hulls, potentially HMS Belfast or HMS Birmingham, could be diverted to the Norwegian order to meet Oslo's requirements for early delivery. A replacement for that hull has not been confirmed. Britain may have designed and sold a ship so capable that 4 nations want it immediately, and could end up with fewer of them than originally planned as a direct consequence of that success. The National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority graded the Type 26 program amber in its 2024 to 2025 annual report, which means delivery is considered feasible, but significant issues exist, requiring managed attention. Amber is the color of a program that is working but is nowhere near comfortable. HMS Glasgow was formally named in May 2025, with Catherine, Princess of Wales, presiding over the ceremony. A bottle of Clyde-side whiskey stood in for the traditional champagne, a nod to the ship's Scottish home that nobody on the Clyde seemed to object to. The ship has since generated its own electrical power for the first time, which represents a meaningful engineering milestone. Contractor sea trials are scheduled for 2026, with full operational capability expected in 2028, which returns us to where this started. Everyone watches the carriers, the jets, the things that photograph well and survive a budget justification. And running alongside all of that, the most strategically pressing question in the North Atlantic is whether a ship that will not be fully operational until 2028 can be built quickly enough, in sufficient numbers, to cover the gap left by frigates that were launched when Margaret Thatcher was still in office. That gap is real. The exposure it creates is real. And the answer, if one exists, is a 149-meter anti-submarine frigate built on the Clyde, acoustically quiet enough and capable enough in detection that 4 allied nations decided independently they could not afford to operate anything else. Nick Childs at the International Institute for Strategic Studies described the Type 26 as the global top-of-the-line anti-submarine warfare frigate when it enters service. The Royal Navy's own second Sea Lord called it the most advanced anti-submarine warfare frigate ever built, possibly anywhere in the world. Norway's Chief of Defense put it more directly, saying simply that Norway was too small to be the only operator of any system it buys, and chose accordingly. Those 3 statements, taken together, explain almost everything. A small country purchasing a British warship is not a story worth telling. 4 countries, independently, selecting the same British warship and then agreeing to operate as a single integrated force in the same waters against the same threat is something categorically different. It is the closest thing the Western Alliance has assembled to a coherent answer to what is actually happening beneath the North Atlantic surface right now. Whether it arrives in time and in sufficient numbers is the question the program still has not answered.